Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are listening, however you are listening or watching. Thank you for tuning in to episode 40 of the 101 podcast, where everyone is entitled to their own opinion. I am your host, Mr. Good Call, Vinnie Paul, the Cuban Cowboy, and joining us today for episode 40, I'm uber excited, not because she's German, but I'm uber excited to welcome a multimedia artist. She's sitting in an ergonomic chair. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Meredith Ochoa.
What's up?
How's it going, young lady?
Oh man, it's going. It's going.
Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead.
Dude, it's so awesome. And I'm just fucking stoked to be here. So thank you, Cuban Cowboy.
Insert air horn. So you were on episode 21. We talked a little bit about your digital photography and kind of your background in photography. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of the newest installments that you have put together in Richmond, Virginia. So give everybody a rundown about that.
Yeah, so gosh, what a wild ride. Just absolutely so cool though. And a lot of it was digital. So how it started is I had created another kind of timeline piece in Charlotte, North Carolina for another church, way smaller scale than this. But it was split canvas and it was celebrating. They wanted art to commemorate and celebrate, like how the church had formed and all the people that were a part of it. And so one of the members of St. Paul's had come to that church and saw the piece and was just like, we have to have that. What is that? Who did that? I want that. We're coming up on our 175th year anniversary of existence. So I want this. And so they gave them, her name is Michelle. She's amazing. And Becky, my contact there, gave her my information and they got in touch with me and we made it happen. But it was, so it was in Virginia and I'm from Charlotte. So creating the piece in Charlotte was a little bit easier. Yeah, I know. I'm from Charlotte. It was a little bit easier because I had like some context of like the area and like, I've like traveled there. In Virginia, I created all of this virtually. I had never been to the church. I had basically relied on just like really great, deep communication with a group of people being able to tell me what it was that they wanted. And then also sometimes like people aren't really able to say like, okay, we want this because they're not really even aware of what can be created or what could possibly be conceived of.
Sure.
So it's really my job to like dig deep and kind of translate all of these many voices into like one story while still obviously honoring the factual historical time. It's 175 years. So it's that space between, okay, this is a timeline and like there's really shitty, crappy things that happened in history. So we don't want to make it about that, but we also don't want to diminish it. So how do you kind of tell a story and celebrate the time without it just being like this documented timeline? So it's like the marriage of the two, like you have the documentation and then you're also creating art.
And you had to do all this, like you said, completely digitally without ever, seeing it face to face, without ever seeing the space that you're going to work with, and you had to interpret that all. And like you said, all these other voices are giving their input, and you just had to come up with something.
It was great though.
Because when I see it, because I'm a hands-on kind of person, I want to see it, I want to touch it, I want to feel it, I want to be there, and I want to know what kind of space and energy it's giving me. But you had to do it all from 800 miles away.
Yeah, but honestly, I have to say, in a way, being removed, sometimes you can get so close to something you can't really see it correctly. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kind of like, it's kind of like the eye can't see itself. You're like so far in, you can't really like see it. So while there's like no way that I could have been like that deep far, and even if I had gone, it was kind of like another challenge, and I think gave a lot of just kind of more of a space to create from a third party, more like objective. I'm not a member of the church, and I hadn't been experienced that amount of history and some of the things they had to overcome. So hearing them and being able to listen to them, being open, because I have no space for bias because I haven't been a part of it, I think really actually helped. So it was hard, but it really helped. And then I think the key was just like staying organized and having, a crap ton of pictures, like what does each wall look like and all the measurements, and like just being organized on like all of the, history and when this happened and who is this. So it was a lot of communication, which is an art in itself, as you know. I mean, this whole show, it's like language can be so limiting. That's why people make art, right? It's like you can't always fucking explain things in just these limited kind of like made up words. So it was a lot of really taking language and organization art to like the maximum, space possible.
Yeah, I mean, you worked with a blank canvas that you, generally speaking, you couldn't see, but you had your measurements and you had pictures, but you had no physical awareness of what the space actually was, and you still made this. And if I'm correct, it's a split canvas. Is that what it is? So if, from my understanding, a split canvas is just panel, 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 panel. It's like taking a wave and putting a space in between it 3 or 4 times, right?
So kind of. So there's different ways you can do it, but for me, the way that I did it is taking one image, right, and dividing it into separate canvases that form a shape. So imagine if it's almost like taking like a cookie, like the dough, like you roll out the dough and then you have like a template, like a cookie cutter that you like stamp it, right? And so whatever's left, like in that circle or triangle or square, is like what it is. So imagine if it's just like 5 different like circles that all come together to form one piece. So that's what I mean by split canvas, where it's each piece kind of has to like work on their own. There can't be like these weird cuts, right?
Yeah.
But then it also is one complete image. So each is individuals, but then everything all is one.
And for those who have not seen the split canvas, it is they're wider panels on the outside, and they get a little bit smaller. And I think there's 5 of them, or no, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
There's 1, 2. I'm like, God, I don't even remember.
6? Are there 6 panels?
So it's like, so what originally inspired me too was like the wingspan of the dove.
Okay.
And so that's kind of how, so you have one piece in the middle, and then you have, it gets bigger, grows. 1, 2, 3, and there's one piece in the middle. So, and that's on both sides, and then you have the wood map, and then you have the tetragrammatron piece. So it's kind of like, the birds, the dove, this super symbolic, the wingspan on both sides. So 1945 to where we are now, going into the future over here and where we're going. And then the rootedness, I believe it's back like the 1840s, 1860s to around like 1930 on the beginnings of the church. So each wingspan was a different set of years.
Okay. And I was looking at a couple different split canvas art because I have to do some homework. I can't just come in here, ignorant. And I was looking at some, and I really admire your piece because I looked at some that were, like the example I gave you was a wave. I saw a split canvas of a wave. And a wave, everyone knows what a wave is going to do. It's going to curl, it's going to crash, it's going to splash. Everyone understands what that wave is going to do. So your eyes automatically don't have to think about what's going to happen in between each separation between the canvases. But yours, there's so many little eccentricities to each corner and each little pocket that they can almost, the people looking at it can almost interpret it for themselves. So it doesn't have one simple meaning. It's not just a crest or a wave. It's open for interpretation.
It is absolutely. And it's very layered too. I mean, a
lot of layers. There's the sketch figures, there's the slaves, the columns, everything.
we're putting years, like, we're putting 175 years into an aesthetic experience, into these 10 or really 12 canvases. So yeah, there's a lot of like depth and richness in there, and the pieces needed to be able to not seem cluttered in that sense, but being able to be like outstretched. That's also why I use this shape, to kind of like bring visual interest to the shape, what had presence, rather than it just being like bam and here's like all this information kind of like all in a line. Needed to have like a rhythm, kind of like music or anything else. It has to have like a flow, but there can be a lot just within a few chords. So
well, a chord in itself is multiple notes put together to create one sound. And
exactly.
And just like St. Paul's, they have an organ that's there, and I just thought that the organ there is grand. It's in the mezzanine level. It sits above the pews, and the church is beautifully decorated, and it's got the long silver pipes for the organ. And I think if I counted right, it had 7 or 8 different ranks of pipes that are there. And I thought an organ was just a piano that has really long tubes. And I'm sure a lot of people think that. And I'm a musician. I've been a musician for 20 years, and I didn't figure this out. I grew up singing bass in a church, and I still never figured it out. And I was looking at it and said, no, it's actually a wind instrument. There's a foot pedal that controls the amount of flow of wind to each pipes. And I don't know, it just I just like learning like little stuff like that, to say, hey, you know what? I thought I knew what I was talking about, but you know what? It turns out I'm a dunce.
It's amazing. I mean, dude, that's life. It's like, you just know that you don't know, but that's the whole joy of like discovery. And so people can discover something new even within the past, and what's deemed as like old or like, oh, that's already gone. It's like we're recreating that and bringing that in to say like, this is where we've been. This is how we're looking at that now, because we have a new perspective, and this is what we're going forward with. And that's part of the whole message, like proclaiming Christ in the heart of the city. That's part of like Christ consciousness and many of like the ideals that in my conversations with St. Paul's that they were interested in. So
and just a little history for St. Paul's. I think the first cornerstone was laid in 1843, and then they finished building in 1845. So now we're coming up on 175 years. You imagine the amount of history that has happened in the last 175 years. Slavery, the Reconstruction, Industrial Revolution, World War I, the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, World War II, the Cold War, Vietnam. And that's just the things that are happening that involve just a lot of people. Just imagine the things that are happening just in that one spot in Virginia, and the kind of things that they've changed, and you've managed somehow to just compile it all into this section of a wall. and the story you tell is magnificent. I get a really antebellum feel from it when I look at it, because I know a lot of the start of it was during that period.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point, and if you just laid it out like all around, like bam, bam, bam in a timeline. It's so true. And that's the point that you bring up. It's important in creating this, not to get fixated on like, okay, like Vietnam, slavery, like all of those are like, they have cult of personalities behind them, their identities and their brands, and they've been capitalized on in many different ways. And they're also things that actually happened in history. So it's, again, in kind of reflection of the wingspan, it was important for me in creating this to kind of have like bird's eye view. What is this, right? Like bird's eye view, what was the journey and how did it really feel? And what did we transcend and uncover and learn from that? And how can I bring that out in art, right? Without it being like this is the event that happened and this is like cause and effect X,
No, it's
like,
not
Y.
never that simple.
It's never that simple. And it's all, and in life, when you look back at your life, it's like, hindsight, it's like, wow, at that time, that was really crappy and that was really shitty and I didn't really understand. But now in this new perspective, I understand, holy crap, those coals became like gems in a crown. I'm so grateful that I had that experience because I didn't realize at the time that it taught me X, Y, and Z. So that's just an example, but it's really this art and these pieces are really like a reflection of that and what they're moving forward into. But to also, commemorate the people that were a part of that in the past and to not, necessarily diminish or forget, but to really celebrate what was the true reason and what did we really learn and what was the real, unadulterated kind of like energy about that time. So it's important that for me not to get sucked into, well, oh my God, the horrors of slavery and the horrors of the war and the depression and all of that and what that means, and to look at how that brought everything together and how that related to the whole experience of the church. If that makes sense.
No, it totally does. It reminds me of something. I've never had a psychological evaluation, but I did have an ex-fiance who was a psychologist, and there's one thing that she told me in all the madness from our relationship. There's one thing that she said that was actually valid. She says, "What happens next, what you choose to do, comes out of your understanding of the situation." So just like slavery and the wars and everything else, if we hadn't had those trials and tribulations, we wouldn't have progressed. We would have still been Stone Age and cavemen.
Absolutely. And it's the same for, our lives. So in the end, really, it's all, the light, and it all really happens to benefit the growth and expansion of the universe and God, source, whatever you want to call it. But these pieces are very reflective of that kind of awareness and that kind of Christ consciousness. They point to that, at least for the viewer.
And it seems like it's a very objective, just bystander view of it. It doesn't say, hey, this is my opinion on it. This is how I feel about it. No, it's just, this is sort of the progression of the events.
Totally. It is obviously a progression, but it's also kind of a story, and little motif within itself. It's like its own world back then, viewing through the lens of now. So, like I said, that was the whole challenge of the piece, creating this timeline of like actual events without it being a timeline of actual events and having it be a piece of art that transcends and creates a new meaning from it and celebrates also who they are. So it's that, again, that kind of like, this is factual, and then this is the narrative, or this is the message that we see and that we're telling through this art. So
I want to take a trip to Richmond, Virginia, just to go see this damn piece, because it's a permanent installment, correct? It's permanent.
It's permanent, and there's a QR code to go with it to know who the people were in. So each picture on the opposite wall, and you can see in some of the shorter videos, on the opposite wall, there's a picture of each of the timeline pieces, and each person has like a little number, like 1, 2, 3, 4 next to their face. And so when you scan the QR code, which is framed in the middle on the opposite wall, it brings up those folders. And so each number, it tells you the person's name, and it has the actual historical photograph. So you can see the photo from which it was created, and then the time. There's a date. Some of them are like circa, like it's an estimated date time because they're so old. But it gives a date, their name, and the actual picture. So that was also, I totally forgot to even touch on that, another part of the digital aspect of this. And then, we're moving to the future, like COVID and all the madness. But it adds another layer. So instead of like viewing that as like this boundary or hurdle to like overcome, it's like incorporating it as adding more to the piece. The whole the whole reason that I like created this digitally was to add more, not to take away. So that, QR code aspects is something that for years, they can just scan it and they can get all the information that they need.
See, so we bring a little bit of history and a little bit of future, and we fuse them together so that people have a better understanding of what they're looking at. It totally makes sense. And that QR code will be available on the Patreon page when we post this episode. This is episode 40 of the 101 podcast with Meredith Ochoa as our guest. I'm your host, Mr. Good Call Vinnie Paul, the Cuban Cowboy. We're going to play a minute and a half of commercials, and we will be right back. Has life got you feeling down? Yes. Do you feel like you're just spinning your wheels? Nowhere? Yes. Don't kill yourself. No. Instead, listen to the 101 podcast to brighten your day and realize that we are way worse off than you'll ever be. Thanks again for tuning in. I figured we threw the baby cry in there for fun. And we're back for the second segment of the 101 podcast, episode 40 with Meredith Ochoa as our guest. I am your host, Mr. Good Call Vinnie Paul for the 101 podcast, where everyone is entitled to their own wrong opinion. And we talked a little bit about the installment that this multimedia artist has put in St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Richmond, Virginia, that has been there since 1844, 1845, somewhere around there. And now I want to talk about the brass tacks. I want to talk about what went in to getting it, because I know in the video we saw Matt Connor and Jason Lattis were helping you install. So talk a little bit about the process of what it takes, how long it takes, and just how you made it happen, like the actual physical labor that it took to get this installment achieved.
Brass tacks, love it. Okay. So we really started to give you, let's explore the timeline of the creation of the timeline. So we really began the conversation. Like I said, she saw the piece in Charlotte, came back, was like, I gotta have that, got in contact with me. That was like in the summer. Summer
of 2020.
Yep. So like between like May, July kind of time, I want to say, May through July, summer. And so we were going to start it then, but then there was some holdups. I think like they had to decide, they had like some other options they wanted to explore, and no worries at all. I never try to force something that isn't, if someone isn't really like gung-ho about it. So I'm like, no worries, take your time. She comes back, probably around like August. Yes. August, September, and is like, we've decided we want to go with you to do this. And great. And so this is where I have to go into, okay, I need this person, this person, this person. We need to get on a call. We need to map out a timeline. These are the things that I need from you. And this is how long I estimate it's going to take. When, and this is where I ask all the questions like, when are you looking to release this? What is the timeline you had in mind? And so their timeline was actually November. I think it was November 7th was the actual anniversary of 175 years. And so they wanted it done by then, but by the time everyone was able to actually make their schedules work and get together, it was October.
Wow.
So it was like,
you can do something blindly in a month and
exactly.
It
was like,
hold true just doesn't seem rational. Doesn't seem logical.
It isn't at all. I mean, but at the same time, I was like, listen, most likely it's not going to be November. We can see how it goes and see how far, but I can't guarantee that it'll be November. So no worries. And plus, there's also what we have to factor in, the delays from COVID, shipment delays. There's all kinds of other things that even if I had been able to do it by then, that could have delayed it. And so we started in October, had a meeting with kind of like the 3 decision makers. They assigned one person to kind of be the voice for the group. right? And he's a historian. He's awesome. His name's Chris. And he was really able to tell me this person doesn't really matter. This person is really prominent. You want to make sure that they're featured. And that's really important because it obviously affects and informs the piece and how and the composition. And he's not really a stranger to, art and looking at, historical pieces. So he was able, at that point, we kind of went into the flow, right? So he gathered all of the years, right, and organized, scanned all the images in there for me, sent them to me. Then that's where I go into the mocking up, right? And so I went through one version. He was like, no, I don't, we don't really want to go that route. And so then we went into the version we have now. And so from there, after the bones are kind of set, then all the tweaking begins with like the people and, some of the lighting and all that. But the bone, when I say the bones, the design and the shape, and even parts of that are changed later just due to other edits and other things. So it's one of those things where you have to be organized and you set a design, but you also have to be able to adapt and work with it as the things come and look at it as like an opportunity. Right. So I set the design and that was approved first, and then we kind of go into the creative flow, which took, everything was approved as far as we're sending this to be printed end of November, early December, really end of November.
So was it always the wingspan design? Was that always what your tunnel vision focus was? Or were
It wasn't. I had a few different options, right, for them to choose from. The wingspan was one of them that I thought looked really good mirrored. I did have like kind of like a trumpet design, like where it's like, it starts smaller and gets like bigger. It's good. It's really good for like more panoramic type kind of imagery. So, but it didn't really work, and I'm glad it didn't. I'm glad we didn't kind of go that route, because I was going to do one different over here, and then the next one was going to be the wingspan on the other wall. So we ultimately decided this kind of wingspan, but originally the tetragrammaton piece was going to be acrylic. And I know, right? And the matte piece went through several iterations. I knew what I know first is I kind of decide the material first. I think that way in terms of like, this is meant to be experienced in real life, right? Like, it's not, I'm creating it digitally, but like the way that you print totally affects how it's going to be, how it's going to feel, and how it's going to be experienced by the viewer. Right. So I knew canvas as just like timeless was gonna, and classic, gonna be for the timelines. I knew that I wanted the textural contrast with wood, like in that glass kind of centerpiece. Okay. So I knew there had to be contrast with all the richness. And then I was like, I wanted even more with the acrylic, with the tetragrammaton, but it ended up feeling like too much. So the tetragrammaton piece can stand alone on itself, just like as an image. Yeah. So yes, we went with it matching in the canvas anyway, and having the traditional 48 by 48 instead of being, circle acrylic. Also, you have to think about the building, the wall color, the architecture is super traditional. So while I have, my
a very modern take.
Yeah, I can still, and well, yes, it's still modern. I would say that it's authentic. I like to be authentic to the space that I'm in, right? And so while yes, you can still be you, I still wanted to like honor and have it like fit, right, the space, and not just be like.
And I've done photographic renderings with you, and even though we did it in a modern way, it still seemed like it had a very classic, like a used feel to it, like something that was almost palpable, that was very relatable too.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So that's kind of what I thought about, and we sent it to print. Print was delayed. a lot
Imagine that.
from COVID, about a month.
Okay.
So we ended up installing January 9th. January 9th, we ended up installing. So if you look at the timeline, we started the conversation
7 months.
like May, June, and we ended up, about 9 months, right? Is that 9? Yeah.
May, 7, 8, 9 months, yeah.
Mhm. About 9 months, which is pretty.
That seems like it's fast though, especially for being such socially distanced. Instead of 6 feet, we're gonna be 600 miles. How's that for social distancing?
It's pretty good, and just multiple people. So thank God that they had one person be the voice for the group.
So they had a liaison. It wasn't like you were dealing with 17 of the church heads and the diocese and all the bishops. It was just one person that was kind of being the voice in between the two parties.
And they trusted me. They wanted me. They kept saying, we don't care. We just want you to make it look the way that you make everything look.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like
that's good. That's good.
They invested and they trusted in like their investment, that they don't know how to describe what they want, but they trusted that I was going to be able to translate it. And so while Chris, who was the voice, his job was really hard, trying to fulfill all the little details and all the critiques along the way. But in the end, some of those critiques, people realized, oh, damn, like I wanted this, but I realized now seeing it, that was really irrelevant. Like, so explaining, like when you view it on the screen, just imagine like this piece that's this big is going to be like 5 feet tall. Right. You have to view it differently. So a lot of that, they put their trust in me being able to communicate, me knowing, okay, this is going to work, regardless of us actually implementing that correction or not.
And what's really good is that you had an awesome support team that was able to also work socially distanced. And then when it comes time to put it together, they were there to put it in. I think that was Matt Connor and Jason Lattis. How did those two come about? Because I don't think I'd seen them on any of your previous projects.
I'm so sorry. Yes, they made it happen. And so Jason is my husband. So by default, no, by default, he was a part of it.
We're here.
Right? So because it will affect him if it doesn't get done.
Right.
So no, but he also, of course, I'm not gonna like drag someone that doesn't want to be a part of it around. He totally helped the whole way, as far as like all the nights of me working on it and like, being stuck or asking his opinion. He's a great voice to just provide someone that's completely removed. Again, that removed perspective that you need. So
a second set of eyes always helps. Measure twice, cut once.
Exactly. So, and they both have that mindset, which is why I wanted them on this project. And so Jason was kind of like my rock in that sense. And then Matt is super, super, super precise in like measuring, cutting. He installs like custom glass for people, like windows. So you have to, again, have that kind of attitude, measure twice, cut once, and really honor what you're doing and who you're working with. And Matt's like one of my really good friends. So I had asked them like in November, well, Jason already knew, but Matt, I had asked like, back in November, like, hey, I'm going to involve you in this project. We're going to have to travel, and worked out logistics with him. We had to rent a car. I had a Miata. So we rented.
You might as well not have a car. Just say that you've got a Yugo.
Dude, I wouldn't trade my car for anything. I love my go-kart. It's awesome. It just wasn't gonna work.
It's a roll cage with paint.
Oh, dude, yeah. It's a motorcycle with like 4 walls.
All right. So, I digress.
Oh, it's dope. But yeah, so that wasn't gonna work. So, and that was a whole other story, the car. So I was like, oh, we could use Jason's car. But that was his Hyundai Elantra. And I was like trying to like fit things in, right? And so it was like, no, again, having that attitude you just said, measure twice, cut once, just fucking go all, just do it right. Even if it's like more money, more time, more whatever, it's just like avoids all the things that could come about, because it's not if, it's when. It seriously is. So it's like, and it's just a more comfortable experience. So we rented a car, like a full-size SUV. I think like the first one was like, oh, it was a Ford Excursion.
Good
Those
for
things,
you. That's a
dude,
big beast.
it's like 2020 Ford Excursion. It was the shit. So yeah,
It's
loaded
crap on
off,
gas, but it has plenty of space.
plenty of space. And yeah, we drove to Virginia, installed. Installation took about 6 hours.
That's all?
And yeah, that includes lunch, really. So, I mean, I have an extraordinary team. Like,
Because I was looking at the time-lapse videos that you posted on Instagram, and all those will be attached to the page when we post this. But I was looking at it and I was thinking, okay, 14-minute time lapse. If you speed it up, you do 2 or 3 times speed, maybe 45 minutes or 60 minutes. But you say 6 hours?
yeah, well, those weren't obviously the whole thing. That was like from the table where you could see the left side. So like the beginning, our roots kind of years timeline, and then like the middle section. But you weren't able to see like the QR code, which is over here, and then the future kind of timeline, which was on the other wall. So those were time lapses of that section, which was awesome, which Jason set up. So yeah, but all in all, it took about 6 hours, and it was really, really, it was one of those feelings where it's like, you belong here. Do you know what I mean? It just felt natural, and it felt right because of all the communication and all of the things that had happened previously. Even though they were digital, I never met any of these people in real life till the installation. Meeting them in real life, because of all that, it made real life that much sweeter. You really appreciated it more because you felt and got to know them without having that. And I feel like that's what's happening with COVID, is people are really appreciating that time with each other and realizing we can't replace it.
Well, they're finding that we can't actually see the people, or can't actually meet with them and be in the same room. So we're forced to have to, make it work, because this is all that we have right now with people being quarantined and the pandemic. All that we have to do is make it work with what we have been, I don't want to say blessed with, but it is a blessing to still be able to communicate with people and to still be able to have those lines of communication open. And so that in itself is a blessing. But I'd much rather, like I said, I'm more hands-on. I'd much rather see someone face to face. I'd much rather talk to you. I'd much rather shake your hand, give you a pat on the back, look you in the eye without having a media face in front of me. But in the parlance of our times, as the dude would say, we have to make it work.
Yeah. Oh, it was sweet. It was so sweet, because it's like, you're the voice that I've heard like for so many nights, like the voice or the avatar, the little box on the screen is like, oh my God, incarnated into the real person.
And now they put a face to it, and it's more relatable.
Yeah, it's so, yeah, it was amazing. And again, I couldn't have done it without the support of my team, and without having them take care of that part of it and be that kind of like hands-on and strict. And they were plaster walls too. I didn't even bring that part up. So they're plaster, so it's not regular drywall.
So you mean they have lead in the paint? Is that what you're saying?
So plaster, and again, like, I'm not, this is not my area, but plaster can crack if you don't
very easily
take certain precautions in drilling in. So like regular drywall, like you can just like drill, like screw, like hang the canvas, right? Like for this, it was a little bit, they had to do and research and prepare more so that they didn't crack the wall, right, in trying to like get these up. So not only is it like you have to line them up visually, but you also have to make sure that the wall isn't going to crack. So I was really just blessed and so grateful that I had people that were willing to really look into that and do that.
And I was watching you in the time lapses, and you look like Steven Spielberg on a set of a full feature film. You were helping, putting the paintings up and lining up and carrying things. You were the gopher, go for this, go for that. You were, pointing and shooting and say, hey, this has to be this. You were there with the measuring tape. You were totally, fully involved. And I just love people that, because a lot of times you get, I'll say you're the CEO of this project. Like, you are the executive producer, but you were still hands-on and you were still getting involved with everything that was there. I love people that are that involved in their work, that they're willing to not only trust their team, but also help their team when they need it.
Yes, it's necessary. Then that's part of being a leader, is like, it's not about you. It's about leading others, like making sure they have what they need.
And building them up so they can get the job done on their end.
Totally.
That's the thing about a team, is that there's all these individuals. Baseball team, sports team, pick a sport. Every position has its own responsibility. And if one responsibility is dropped, then the productivity of that team goes completely out of the window. So it takes everybody being on top of their game in order to achieve what the goals are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, you have to be a part of it to really be able to lead effectively, and you have to be a part of it to make it happen and be there for your team. And so yeah, I love working with others in that way, like in my collaborations and stuff like that. I feel like so much more is created that way when we really open up ourselves to like working with others. And then, you have even more, rather than, and obviously not to say there's anything wrong with like introspection and all of that, but I feel it's kind of like one big flow. You kind of like have to know yourself and what you can do to be able to work with others effectively.
Meredith, I love you. I don't know what else
I love you.
I freaking love you. For the people that weren't able to watch our first interview between me and Meredith met in a condominium lobby. She was doing a photography class. She was leading the class, everybody. Check this out. She left her camera at home. So she became the subject of the class. Now, I was walking out of my friend's house in that said condominium, and I walked upon this class and they said, hey, do you want to be a part of this? And me, being the extrovert that I am, saying, sure, why not? I'm already not a part of something. What's the worst that could happen? And sure enough, I met this lovely young lady here, and we did some wedding photos together where I held her hand intimately and we looked deeply into each other's eyes. Oh, my Pookie Bear. It was so amazing. And now here she is. I guess, what was that, 5, 6, 7 years ago?
Holy crap. I think I had just gone out.
At least 5 years ago.
Yeah, or 6. I think it was 2015, wasn't it?
Yeah, because it was about a year before I moved to Colorado, and I moved to Colorado in 2016. So yeah.
So 2015.
And then the best, another little piece about that is the friend that I was visiting who lived in that condo moved to Colorado a year after me.
Of course.
After I'd already moved back to Atlanta.
Because it looked so fun.
Are you kidding? Colorado has postcard views every single day. Every morning you wake up. They actually have seasons there, which I don't get in Los Angeles. I don't even get thunderstorms in Los Angeles.
I know, you guys.
I had thunder and lightning one time in the 2 years that I've been here. Whereas in Georgia or Texas or Denver, Colorado, where I've lived the last 5 years, it happens for 6 months out of the year.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we're going to do, we're going to take one more commercial break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about each piece in the installment and talk a little bit more about St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Richmond, Virginia. This is the 101 podcast, episode 40 with Meredith Ochoa, where everyone is entitled to their own wrong opinion. and I lost my Bluetooth connection. So we're gonna skip the damn commercial. You know what? Technical difficulties. Here we go. So, so the installment you said is 1, 2, 6, 7 panels, right?
Yes.
4, 6. All right, so 7 panels. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the panels. I actually took notes on them. I looked at each one individually because each one kind of says a little bit something different. So I want to start from the left side and work my way into the middle and then go over. So I really get the top left corner, for those who are looking, is a Navajo lady holding what looks to be a 6-month-old baby. And then across the panel is what looks like Andrew Jackson's face in fading into a Greek pillar. So I think the pillar is the pillar of the front of the church. Is that correct?
Yes. What's behind him is the actual is the part of the structure of the church.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If
So-
you're talking about the guy that's right next to the baby,
Yes.
yes, that is like the top part, you know, I guess they would call it, I know there's an architectural term for it, but the top, like on the roof where they have that circular piece, you know, in some older churches,
Mm-hmm.
that part of the church is what it is.
Okay. And then is that an Indian woman with a baby that I'm looking at?
So these people, these are where the really, really old like roots of the church.
And the reason why I ask is because you do digital photography. Is that a fair statement? You do digital photography, but this looks like they're all images that have been pulled from somewhere else that you digitized into this canvas.
So all the images you see of people are people from the church. All of them are people that were critical in the formation of the church. They're all actual historical photographs that were scanned in by Chris that I then digitally manipulated. So, but then that was also another reason why it really worked out for me, is because of my knowledge of analog processes. And really, I mean, I was very, very anti-digital when I first started photography.
Yeah, we had a conversation. Yeah.
I have a strong understanding of like how these were made and like the contrast and like some of the different aesthetic qualities that happen with these older photographs. So once Chris had scanned them in and sent them to me, I then digitally manipulated them to fit into, so imagine like in the dark room, right? When you're layering negatives, like multiple exposures, I was doing that digitally with this piece, with the photograph. So like imagine the person was one negative and then like whatever was behind it, like whether it be the church or whatever I had created behind it, and then they layered together and how they blend together, and then like the lighting and stuff, all of that created in Photoshop.
Just Photoshop. That's it?
Just, well, so Lightroom and Photoshop I use in combination, which Lightroom is another photo editing software that is more for like batch editing and like quick edits and stuff like that. So usually people's workflow is they go from Lightroom to Photoshop or like raw. And so since these were all already scanned in as JPEGs, that's the other thing, is getting quality resolution. So like Chris obviously doesn't know what's going to be, I had to, there was part of it that's education, like, hey, anything under like, you know, 250 PPI, like let's try to keep it around like the 200 range, 300 would be freaking awesome. For the resolution for some of these images and also the size, he doesn't know by looking at them. So I had to kind of educate him when he's going through the archives. No, that's not going to work because it's too small, because the pixel, there's just not enough pixel information. What was going to work and what wasn't. There's some pictures, you know, you want to use, but if you can't get a high res digital scan or scan it in, have access to a scanner that will do that and scan it yourself, then it won't be able. And so I'm always pushing the limit of what we can use. So there are some images in here that are like super abstracted, and that's because they were lower quality, and I'm using that instead of saying, oh, it just won't work, and like that's a boundary you can't get over, which sometimes it is.
No, you make it
But
work.
you can make it work especially if it's really important. So we could make it abstracted and make it like fractalized, and it says something too about the piece, and then it works. It has a different kind of meaning, and it works differently with all the rest. So using that and leveraging those mistakes instead of, looking at them as, oh, well, it's a really shitty image. Sometimes the shitty images are like the most interesting, or they can be
Well,
a lot of times.
and just like the fade to in between the different canvases, the really bad images again force you to make it your own and interpret it as something that's meaningful to you, instead of just saying, here's an image and it's stock. No, it's something that lets the mind of the person looking at it kind of say, oh, this is what it means to me, and this is how I individualize it.
Exactly. And so, and the structure of the church, those were also photographs. It was a diptych, and I've like mirrored and repeated.
It looks almost, the visuals almost look cartoonish, but
Mhm.
like a cartoon that not Garfield cartoon, not Ed and Eddie cartoon, but kind of like a cartoon movie, to where it's digitally formatted to where it looks like, even though it's old and it's faded, it still looks real.
Yeah, it's that space, it's that painterly space between where like the photographs start to become kind of paintings. And that's the quality that's really innate in a lot of these older images that I love so much. They naturally, especially when you start playing with the contrast and the exposure, they naturally can start to go that way. And that's really what gives that effect, because of that contrast between the light and the dark can start to get really graphic at a certain point and linear. But these, because they're older and the lines aren't so graphic, it has like a painterly quality. So yeah, and then you see on the street, I mean, every aspect in these is from the actual historical photo. I've just even like the people on the street made them like silhouettes, right? Like standing around looking at what's going on, or moved them to a different place. But all the ingredients were there, St. Paul's ingredients, so to speak. And then I composited them to tell this, story in a unique way. And, obviously like the color palette and all of that was chosen by me as well. So.
And I love in these older photos that nobody's smiling. Not because they're going through hard times, but because it took you 2 minutes to get a photo reel ready to take a picture.
Yes. Yeah.
And,
yeah.
And it's not that people were sad, and it's not that they're going through hard times. It's just, this is the reality that they're going through, is that here I am holding a baby. I'm in the church, and you know what? It takes them 3 minutes to load up the reel and get the flash bang ready to go. I'm not going to sit there and hold a smile, because I know it takes 17 muscles to smile and 42 to frown, but still holding 17 muscles up for 3.5 minutes is still an upward climb.
I know.
It's a natural feel to the images that you produced.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm so glad that you know that, first of all, about the exposure time. I also think it's because there's a formality back then, like getting your picture taken.
Oh, yeah. It was very.
Exactly. And it's like, I matter, right? Mm-hmm. Getting your photo taken, and that's one of the things that first attracted me about photography too. It's like, I don't have to create, especially in history, for the king or for the church or whatever. I can take a picture of me, and it's me, and it means something. It's just like any other piece of art. When photography started to cross into that space is what I so love. So it's that focus on like the individual in an actual photograph. rather than, I got this commission, I had to do this commission of this person, this painting for the church or something. So yeah.
There's one thing I really liked that in both the panels you included was the bushy tree top, words are hard, the bushy tree top with the strong roots. And what I noticed about the tree in the middle of each canvas is that it looks like it's growing out of a rock. Is that tree there, or did you implant it? And why the tree? Because trees that are healthy leaves usually boast health, prosperity, growth, and just why the tree? Why the tree?
I love it. Okay.
Because it does. Every time I look up St. Paul's Episcopal Church, I never see a giant oak tree there. So tell me why the tree.
Yeah, totally. So the tree, and okay, so I'll take my previous statement back. All of the ingredients in the piece are St. Paul's except for the tree.
Except for the tree. Okay.
Except for the tree.
Go. Now we're on.
The tree, and there was a tree that was St. Paul's that was in one of the previous drafts. So there has been a tree there within the composition. It just wasn't that tree.
Okay.
So wow, there was a tree there. This is awesome. So when I mirrored the landscape behind, like where the buildings are, and there's kind of a road with people that you can see in the background on both sides. Mm-hmm. When I mirrored, those are taken from two separate photographs, and when I mirrored them, so it went like that, there was a tree, because there was the outline of a tree on each edge. When I mirrored them, that tree, it formed one tree, one big tree. It was a lot bigger than this. It was like a Christmas tree, really. And so it was like, it was like one of those things when you're in the flow and you're creating, mm-hmm. you discover these things. And this is where it like really becomes art. It's like, okay, I'm like discovering this that I feel like is supposed to be a part of it because the composition is literally forming it. So that became a tree. And I was thinking about it and I was like, well, why a tree? And then I thought of how I was creating this and our conversations about the rootedness between all people, the family tree, the tree timeline of kind of events. When you think of a tree, how many years are in the circle of the trunk and how it grows that you can't necessarily like really see from far away, but then like you get up close, and that's kind of like how these pieces are. So that went into the decision. And also the tree of life. There's a lot.
Like trees are very representative of a lot of different things, especially when it comes to just Mother Nature and feeling a connectedness.
All is one, the unity of all things.
I think what it takes to boast, and the tree in the images, which we'll put on the Patreon page and we'll show your Instagram. A tree is, think about it, it starts with a seed, little bitty seed, and that seed goes into the dirt, gets a little bit of water, gets a lot of sunshine, and the sun sings, "Ba ba black sheep, have you any wool?"
Right.
And then the seed says, "Oh, let's sprout up toward the music." And then that little sprout, which is thinner than my finger, over many, many years becomes wider than I am as a human being. And the rings inside represent what? Hundreds and hundreds of years of growth, which is what St. Paul's is celebrating.
Exactly. I absolutely, and I'm so glad you brought that up. It's also, the trees are just observers to everything. Think about how much the trees have seen while all of this was going on, and like the depression, and like
and someone,
right, and people are blowing up over here, and people are like making new governments over here, and like the tree is just like there the whole time. So in a way,
it's a very steadfast symbol.
Exactly. It's this like mindful kind of like observance, but also the reminder that it's just those roots and that unity between all things, which is why it's better. You can see this better in real life. You have that rootedness kind of like fading out and going to all of the people. But the tree, I felt like joined both of them cohesively, where it's like you had that same tree back then, and it's still there. And so the tree can be, representative of many, many things that, we observed, and it's just like that voice or God or source or whatever the guidance was for the church and the development that was always there, that even fast forward 175 years later is still there and eternal. So it's many things like growth and life and unity and that infinite intelligence. But I felt like because I had discovered it by mirroring, I felt like this really needs to be a part of it. It's just the original tree didn't work because it felt more like Christmas. It could have worked, but so I put that's a tree that I had taken a photograph of, 35 millimeter film.
Yeah.
One of my first photographs in high school in the dark room that I developed, one of my favorite photographs. So I felt like it was fitting for my own discovery.
And see, that's the connectivity. That's the growth of where you started and where you're at now, and blending the ages in between, and to show just kind of the growth. Now, there's one a panel here that is particularly unique to me. It's the only one that has words in it. It says, "Proclaiming Christ in the heart of the city." Now, St. Episcopal's Church, or St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Richmond, Virginia, is an Episcopal church, but there's also a Hebrew installment in the middle of the sanctuary, which is and forgive me if I say it wrong, a tetragrammaton. And for those that don't know what a tetragrammaton is, it is a 4-letter way to express the name of Jesus, right? Yahweh.
Yes, dude, right on. So yeah, tetragrammaton.
But that's weird to me because Episcopals are not Jewish, but they married the two.
Well, Jesus was a Jew.
But
was Jewish.
For my clarification, are those Jewish temples?
No, so Episcopals are Christian.
Okay.
Yeah, are Christian. And so I don't think that the tetragrammaton piece is really saying like this is Jewish. It's really like the unity, like Yahweh, God of all things.
Jehovah. It's
right, like the light. And it's just timeless it can span multiple denominations and religions. And it's really also pointing to, being Christian. Well, Jesus was a rabbi, and the roots of even, the Messiah that they follow in that. So it's more of a sign of unity than anything else, rather than it being like something that is out of place. I felt super drawn to it just because of that aspect, because it was really unifying and really transcended, proclaiming Christ in the heart of the city. What's it really about? It's really about that, so I felt like that had to definitely be recognized and be a part of it.
Well, it's not your installment, but it is there in the church. And since they are proclaiming this in the heart of the city, it is actually directly across the street from the state capitol of Virginia, there in Richmond.
Yeah.
It was actually named the Cathedral of the Confederacy because Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee were political figures that used that as a popular house of worship.
So lots of history there. Like I said, this is why, again, they needed someone that was able to, in an unbiased and really diplomatic way, be able to celebrate and recognize the history without it becoming about, well, the Confederacy and what does that mean? There's so much distortion about that already that it's distracting from the message of proclaiming Christ in the heart of the city. Now, in no way is that diminishing, right? There's still the recognition there as far as like the timeline, the pieces, and the history. but in a way where it's seen as this contributed to our growth. And this is part of how we became in, the self-actualized, forward moving congregation that we are, was really kind of like my take on that, and really why that they hired me to do this, because it can't you can't get so caught up in what is, or you never can create. It's kind of like people are so focused, they're like, face reality. You didn't come here to face reality, you came here to create reality. And so you can look at it as like, this is what is, and have nothing more than that, because that's what you define your experience as. Or you can create from and discover from that in a never-ending infinity. I would take the latter, right?
Yeah. Well, and the good thing about art is no matter when you're living, if you look at art from a certain period of time, you can tell what was happening based off of the art that was created during that period.
Yeah, exactly. And it's such a rich tapestry of what's going on. And so it's absolutely fascinating to look into, no matter.
And especially to see one period from different points of view. So if you were to look at World War II and look at art from Germany and Poland and the United States and Japan and Great Britain, you would see all these different perspectives, but they would all be telling their side of a story that was happening at the same time, just in different places at the same period.
Absolutely. And again, it's always the lens that you're looking through. It's your perspective. There's like what happened, and then there's the story that you tell about it, right? So it just lends itself to exactly what I was saying before. That's why they hired me, and they needed someone to not be so caught up in the marketing, the story of all of these things that have happened that, like we've been taught in school, that this person, this name means that, and whatever. And to really, this whole piece and installation, and my goal was to transcend that. That's really what they were wanting.
Well, that takes a lot to be able to say, oh, I know these things happen. I'm going to remove myself from them and just give an objective observation and say, look, this is what I want to present to you as how it feels to me. And I think you already know how I feel about it. I think it came out famously. Like, if anybody is anywhere near Richmond, Virginia, if you want to go take a road trip, go up there. I did some hiking up there, go through the Great Dismal Swamp, George Washington, dug some ditches there. There's a beautiful placid lake that's 3,000 square feet, or excuse me, 3,000 square acres that's there. On the way up to Richmond, Virginia, you can go through the underwater tunnel that goes outside the city. Richmond's just a nice town, and if you get a chance, definitely go see this installment there. People, it's going to be there permanently. There's no excuse to not go see it.
Yep, for the next 175 years.
Yeah, no, I was going to say 350 years. Because
Well,
it was like another civil war before they burn it down.
There you go, and I'll be back to interpret it in some way.
Yeah, and you weren't there 175 years ago, but somehow through your just awesomeness, you were able to just take all these images that you're provided with and take the history and the story and the background and all the richness that comes with it, whether it be positive or negative. What you've put out it's a positive light, and it really, I look at each individual square and I took notes on each individual square: top middle, bottom middle, top left, bottom left.
God.
I took notes on all of them because each one stands alone in itself. But again, like we were talking about with the team, each piece does its own work in order to unify the whole.
Absolutely. And that's part of creation. That's part of the whole congregation. It was not just one person, it takes a village. It's always a we, it's all one. That points back to the tetragrammaton and back to Yahweh, all of that. and even myself in creating all this, it's a creation, from me, but I am channeling what they're telling me, and I am guided too. It's always, no one ever really achieves anything alone, ever. So that's why it's to just really accept that and embrace that and leverage that. That's where you get really, really into the flow, can really discover and create, great work like this.
Meredith, I love having you on. We're wrapping up the show. I hate to see you go. That's my rhyme for the day.
That was good, dude.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been episode 40 of the 101 podcast, where everyone is entitled to their own wrong opinion. Our guest is Meredith Ochoa, has done a latest installment of a 175-year celebration at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Richmond, Virginia. If you get a chance, go out and see it. Meredith, give everybody a 30-second send-off.
It's been real, and don't work too hard.
Succinct and precise, much like her art. I love it. Hey, Meredith, I'm going to play some outro music. Stay on the line, and then we'll catch up a little bit afterwards.
Right on.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We loved having you.
Bye.
I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but that sound signals the end of the show. We appreciate your continued listenership. This is the 101 podcast, where everyone is entitled to their own wrong opinion. Eh? Eh?